Thursday night. One of those rainy evenings where each drop feels like it's carrying a secret, like the whole world is whispering right outside your window. That night sticks with me because it was the night I realized everything in my life was about to turn upside down. Megan had left the house earlier, wearing that same black dress she always wore for a night out, but there was something off about her this time. Things had been tense between us for weeks, like the air was thick and heavy, making it hard to breathe. She didn't even give me her usual half-hearted goodbye. Instead, she just grabbed her purse, swung her jacket over her shoulder, and said, "Don't wait up, it's a late night with the girls." The way she said it, casual but oddly perfect, almost like she'd rehearsed it, made me uneasy. I didn't say a word, but a tight knot formed in my stomach. Call it gut instinct, or maybe just knowing her too well after all these years, but I knew something was wrong. There wasn't any proof yet, but even the sound of her heels clicking down the hallway felt like she was leaving more than just the house behind. I stayed in the living room, the TV on, but I had no idea what was playing. My mind kept circling back to her, wondering where she really was. After a while, I picked up my phone and shot her a quick message, "Have fun tonight." No reply. Hours drifted by, and by the time midnight hit, I couldn't stay put anymore. Something in my gut nudged me to check her location, a step I'd never considered before. I'd always thought we had trust nailed down, but when I opened that app, my heart stopped cold. She was nowhere near where she'd said she'd be. Instead, she was across town, parked at an address I didn't recognize. I stared at that tiny dot on the screen, every second stretching into eternity. I tried to make sense of it, telling myself she might be picking something up on her way home or maybe hit up an afterparty. But my hands were already shaking, and I knew I couldn't just sit there. I grabbed my keys and drove, the trip flashing by in a blur of headlights, wet streets, and a growing sense of dread that wouldn't let up. My heart hammered in my chest, part of me clinging to the hope that I'd get there and find it was all just a mix-up. But another part of me, the part one wished I could ignore, knew what I was about to find. When I finally reached the address, I realized it was just some random apartment building. It definitely wasn't her friend's place, and it wasn't anywhere I'd ever been. The rain had slowed to a drizzle, and the night around me felt almost too quiet, unsettlingly so. I parked a little further down the street and just sat there, staring at that building, hoping it would somehow tell me the truth so I wouldn't have to face it myself. And then, I saw her. She walked out, her hair a little out of place, makeup smudged in a way that didn't fit a casual night out with friends. She didn't notice me at first, but when she turned toward her car, our eyes met. She was smiling, and not just any smile, this was the satisfied kind, the type people wear when they think they've gotten away with something. My stomach churned, and I couldn't sit there any longer. Without even thinking, I got out and slammed the car door, the sound shattering the quiet night like a gunshot. She turned, and in that brief second, I saw something I'd never seen on her face before, panic. "Jake! What are you doing here?" she stammered, her voice shaky. I took a deep breath, trying to keep my anger from boiling over. "That's the question I should be asking you, Megan. What the hell are you doing here?" She glanced around, looking for some way out, but there wasn't one. The game was over, and we both knew it. "Jake, it's not what it looks like," she said, her voice slipping into that tone she used whenever she wanted to manipulate me. But then she said something that made my blood run cold. It was just harmless fun, a one-time thing. It didn't mean anything. Her words hit me like a punch to the gut. Harmless fun. A one-time thing. She looked at me as if she expected me to just accept that, like her betrayal was nothing more than a small, forgettable mistake. I stood there, the rain starting to come down harder, soaking me through, but I didn't move. She watched me, probably waiting for me to explode, but all I could say was something I never thought would come out of my mouth. "You think a night with someone else is just, harmless?" I asked, my voice surprisingly steady while I felt ready to burst inside. She opened her mouth, maybe to explain, but I raised my hand, cutting her off. Come home tonight, and you'll find our marriage certificate torn to pieces. Got it? Her eyes widened, shock taking over her face, but I didn't stick around to see if she had anything else to say. I turned and walked back to my car, leaving her standing there in the rain. That night, sleep barely touched me. The house felt colder, emptier than it ever had before, even though nothing had changed physically. It was only me who understood how drastically everything was about to shift. The drive home is mostly a blur now. I remember gripping the wheel so tightly that my knuckles turned white, the streetlights blending into streaks of light and shadow as my mind looped back to that scene outside the apartment. Megan's face when she realized she'd been caught, how quickly that smug confidence crumbled right there in front of me. But more than her panic, her words kept slashing at me, harmless fun. That's how she labeled a night with another man, slipping around behind my back, then having the gall to look me in the eye and say it was nothing, like it didn't destroy everything we'd built. My jaw clenched, trying to bottle the anger, but it was a losing battle. By the time I got home, I wasn't in control of myself anymore. I stormed into the house, slamming the door so hard that the walls shook. Everything looked exactly like it had when I left, yet now it felt foreign, almost hollow. Stepping into the house was like entering someone else's home. Each photo, every piece of furniture, even the faint trace of her perfume, it all felt like a lie. I couldn't stand it. I grabbed the first thing that symbolized our life together, a framed wedding photo from the shelf in the living room. In it, she was gazing at me with that smile, her eyes filled with what I used to believe was love. The sight turned my stomach. The frame slipped from my hands, shattering on the floor, shards of glass scattering across the room, much like the pieces of our life. But I wasn't done. I went straight to the study, yanked open the drawer where we kept important papers, and there it was, our marriage certificate. Once, it had meant something profound, a promise, a commitment. Hands shaking with rage, I held it for a moment, then tore it clean down the middle. The ripping sound was strangely satisfying, almost final. I didn't stop there, though. I kept tearing until it was nothing but tiny scraps of confetti scattered on the floor. The house was silent except for my heavy breathing. I stood there, just staring at the torn pieces at my feet, feeling like hours had passed. My thoughts raced, but my mind felt numb. She didn't deserve that certificate. She didn't deserve the vows we exchanged or the life we'd built. If she thought she could walk back in here and brush this off as a misunderstanding, she was about to get a serious wake-up call. I started pacing the living room, running my hands through my hair, trying to calm the storm raging inside me, but it was no use. My mind kept circling back to her. How long had this been going on? Was it really just a one-time thing, or had she been sneaking around for months, maybe even years? Every late night, every so-called work trip, every message she dismissed as just the girls suddenly felt tainted. By 3 a.m., I lost track of how many times I'd replayed the night's events in my mind. I kept hoping I'd wake up and this would all be a bad dream, but reality didn't let up. And the worst part? I wasn't even sure I wanted to confront her again, not yet. I needed more. My eyes landed on her laptop, left open on the kitchen counter. She usually kept it locked, but tonight, of all nights, she'd left it wide open, like she never expected me to notice, as if she'd grown too comfortable in her deceit. My hands hovered over the keyboard, hesitating for a split second. I'd never crossed that line before, not once. But the Megan I thought I knew had already burned everything down. The messages were easy to find, too easy. Her browser was still open to her email, and there it was, his name, Ben. A chain of emails, starting out casual, then drifting into flirtation, and eventually, as I scrolled further, crossing into explicit territory. Every line, every word felt like a punch to the gut. But it didn't stop there. There were photos too, shots of them laughing together in a way I hadn't seen her laugh in years. And then, a photo of her in that same black dress from tonight, standing outside a bar, leaning into him like he was the only person in her world. I snapped the laptop shut, feeling my chest tighten. Suspicions are one thing, but seeing it all laid out like that? That's a whole different kind of hurt, the kind that burrows deep, festering. I sat there for a moment, staring at the closed laptop, trying to steady myself. Then I heard the front door creak open. Megan was home. Her heels tapped across the hardwood, each step echoing through the silence of the house. She didn't know yet, she had no idea what kind of mess she was walking into. I stayed put, waiting for her to come face to face with what she'd done. When she finally stepped into the living room and saw me, her eyes widened, but not with guilt, not even with shame. No, she had that same cool, distant look she always put on, like she thought she could spin any situation to her favor. She didn't even notice the shredded marriage certificate right away. Not until she stepped on one of the torn pieces. Her eyes followed the trail of paper, then looked back up at me. I waited for her to say something, an apology, an explanation, anything. But she just crossed her arms and, with that cold, unaffected tone from earlier, asked, "What's your problem, Jake?" It took every ounce of control I had not to blow up on the spot. The way she spoke, so casual, so completely unfazed, was the final match that set the whole thing ablaze. "What's my problem?" I echoed, standing up slowly, struggling to keep my rage in check. "You really think we're just going to stand here and have a little chat like none of this happened?" She rolled her eyes, her indifference as plain as day, and tossed her purse onto the floor. "Jake, I'm exhausted. Can we do this in the morning? I don't have the energy for whatever this is right now." I took a step forward, my feet crunching over the torn paper, and that sound finally caught her attention again. Her eyes flicked to the shredded marriage certificate scattered across the floor, and for the first time, I saw something break through her calm expression, not fear, but irritation. "What the hell did you do?" she snapped, her tone sharp, more annoyed than remorseful. She moved closer, kicking a piece of the torn certificate aside like it was just some trash in her path. "I'm done playing this game, Megan," I said, my voice low, barely controlled. "I know everything. I saw the messages. I know about Ben. I know about tonight, all of it." Her reaction wasn't what I expected. No panic, no regret, just a sigh, like I'd caught her in some small, inconvenient fib. "Jake, I already told you, it was just a stupid night, a one-time thing. You're really going to tear up our marriage certificate over something that meant nothing?" She laughed, but it wasn't the laugh I remembered from when we were happy. This laugh was bitter, hollow. "God, you're being so dramatic." I couldn't believe what I was hearing. She wasn't sorry, not even close. She wasn't even trying to fake it. Dramatic? I shot back, feeling my voice rise as the anger I'd been holding back started spilling out. "You think this is me being dramatic? You lied to me, Megan. You cheated on me. You've been sneaking around with another guy, and you have the nerve to stand here and act like it's nothing?" She shrugged, like I'd just accused her of something trivial, not shattered our marriage. "I don't know what you want me to say, Jake. It's not like I planned this, it just happened. Things between us haven't exactly been great for a while, and you know that." I blinked, struggling to process her words. "Are you seriously trying to pin this on me?" "I'm not blaming anyone," she replied, her voice calm enough to make my skin crawl. "I'm just saying, maybe if you'd paid more attention to me, we wouldn't be in this situation." That's when it hit me. She didn't feel guilty, not even a little bit. She wasn't sorry at all. She was twisting it around, trying to make this my fault, as if her cheating was somehow on me. Like I was the one who'd failed for not seeing her clearly, for not noticing her needs. The sheer audacity of it, her standing there, meeting my eyes, and telling me I should have done better while she was off with someone else, left me speechless. For a split second, I thought about letting everything I felt come out in a shout, telling her exactly what her betrayal had done to me. But the anger shifted, it was no longer a blazing fury. It became something colder, sharper, more controlled. I didn't need to yell, didn't need to argue. It was already done. You know what, Megan? You're right, I said softly, surprised at how steady my voice was. I haven't been paying attention. But now. Now I see everything. She stared at me, confusion flickering across her face, her mouth slightly open, like she was bracing for what I'd say next. Jake, what are you? You thought a night with another guy was just harmless fun, I interrupted, my voice as hard as steel. Fine. You had your fun. But in the process, you lost me. You lost this marriage. Her eyes widened as she started to grasp that this wasn't going to go the way she'd expected. Wait, Jake, don't do this. You're making this into something it's not. It didn't mean anything. I let out a bitter laugh. Didn't mean anything. It meant everything, Megan. Every lie, every time you made me question myself, to doubt my own instincts, it all meant something. And I'm done pretending it didn't. For the first time that night, I saw her mask slip. The cool confidence and indifference cracked, and a flash of panic crossed her face. She stepped toward me, reaching out, but I stepped back. Jake, wait. Let's talk about this. We can work through it. I swear it was just a mistake. I never wanted to hurt you. I shook my head, feeling the crushing weight of this disaster pressing down on me. You didn't want to hurt me. You didn't even care enough to think about hurting me. You made your choice when you went to his place tonight. She opened her mouth, like she was about to say something, but no words came. For the first time, she was speechless, and in that silence, I knew none of it mattered anymore. The woman I'd loved, the one I married, she wasn't here. She hadn't been for a long time. I turned and headed toward the hallway. I'll be gone by morning. This marriage is over. Jake, stop, she yelled, her voice desperate now, all that control slipping away. Where are you going? You can't just walk out, we're married. You can't leave like this. I paused in the doorway and looked back at her one last time. You ended this marriage long before I did, Megan. I'm just here cleaning up the mess. With that, I walked out, leaving her alone amidst the shattered pieces of our broken life. But I didn't leave right away. As I stepped into the hallway, something, a need for closure, maybe, held me back, and I stayed, just out of her sight, to see what she'd do once she thought I was gone. I leaned against the wall, my heart pounding so loud I could hear it, and waited, listening. At first, there was only silence. Then, I heard her muttering to herself, frustrated. Unbelievable, she said, almost under her breath. All this, over nothing. That word, nothing, hit me like a slap. To her, it was nothing. The lies, the cheating, the promises she'd broken, they meant nothing to her. My fists clenched, nails biting into my palms as I fought to stay calm, waiting to see what she'd do next. Then I heard her pick up her phone, and my blood ran cold. She wasn't calling to apologize or even to think things over. No, she was calling him, Ben. Her tone changed, softened, turned almost sickeningly sweet. Yeah, it's me. No, he found out, she said, and then, unbelievably, she laughed, a light, careless laugh, like it was all just a game. Yeah, he got all dramatic, threatened to leave. Can you believe that? I felt my jaw clench, my teeth grinding as I listened. I had never hated her more than I did in that moment, the way she talked about me like I was nothing more than a fool, overreacting to her betrayal. That she could be so calm, so untouched after everything, that was a cruelty I hadn't thought possible. She kept talking, oblivious to how much I was hearing. Don't worry, it'll blow over. I'll handle him. He's not going anywhere. Trust me, he'll be back by morning. He's too soft to actually leave. I couldn't take another word of it. I stepped into the living room, my footsteps creaking against the floor. Her head snapped around, and I watched the color drain from her face when she saw me standing there, staring straight at her. The phone was still pressed to her ear, but she was frozen, wide-eyed, like a deer caught in headlights. "Hang up the phone, Megan," I said, my voice steady but ice-cold. She didn't move, clinging to that phone like she thought it was her last chance to control the situation. But I wasn't about to let her manipulate this anymore. I said hang up. Her hands shook as she fumbled to end the call, her voice dying as she lowered the phone. She opened her mouth, like she was about to explain, but I lifted a hand, stopping her in her tracks. "Don't," I warned, my voice cutting through the room sharper than I'd ever heard it. "I heard everything." She swallowed, her eyes darting with a flicker of panic. "Jake, you. What?" I interrupted, stepping closer. "Going to lie again? Tell me this is all a misunderstanding. That I'm overreacting. That it's somehow my fault." Her mouth clamped shut, but I could see the gears turning, searching for a way to spin it, to manipulate me. She'd always been good at making me doubt what I knew deep down, but not this time. This time, I saw it all with a clarity that she couldn't twist. "I was standing right here," I continued, my voice low and unyielding. "I heard you talking to him. I heard you laugh. You think this is some kind of game? You think I'm a joke?" Her eyes flicked to the side, like she was looking for an escape route, but she was cornered now, there was nowhere left to run. Finally, she looked back at me, her voice barely a whisper. "Jake, I didn't mean it like that." I shook my head, cutting her off. "You meant every word. Don't insult me by pretending you didn't. You really think I'm too soft to leave? That I'll come crawling back after everything?" For the first time, I saw genuine fear in her eyes. She understood she'd pushed too far, crossed a line she couldn't walk back from. But I wasn't finished. "You were never going to tell me the truth, were you?" I asked, my voice steady, the rage settling into something cold. "You were just going to keep lying, keep pretending everything was fine, all while sneaking around." She started to shake her head, but one look from me stopped her. "And even now, after getting caught, you still don't care. You're not sorry, you're just sorry you got caught." She opened her mouth, but no words came. I could see her scrambling, grasping for anything to say, any last attempt to take control. But she was out of moves. "I was ready to leave tonight," I said, my tone calm, resolute. "But now? Now, I'm going to make this hard for you, Megan. Much harder than you ever imagined." I saw her eyes flash, panic, fear, maybe even anger, but she stayed silent, bracing herself for what would come next. "I'm not just walking away and letting you have what you want," I went on, stepping forward until I was just inches from her. "You're going to feel the weight of what you've done. You're going to watch everything unravel, and this time, you won't be able to talk your way out." She stumbled back, her confidence shattered, her voice shaking. "Jake, wait, we can talk about this." I smiled, but it was a cold, final smile she'd never seen before. "We're done talking, Megan. This is the last conversation we'll ever have." With that, I turned and walked out, leaving her surrounded by the ruins of everything she thought she'd controlled. Outside, the rain had started up again, but I didn't mind. The cold air hit me, and for the first time in ages, I felt free. I didn't know exactly what tomorrow would bring or how I'd make her face the consequences, but I knew one thing for certain, this wasn't over. The rain was pouring down as I made my way to the car, soaking through my clothes, but it didn't faze me. The chill outside matched the storm raging inside me. I wasn't even thinking about where I was headed, just that I needed to get away from her, to leave behind a house that had become nothing more than a stage for her lies. As I drove, the image of Megan, standing there as the truth hit her, wouldn't leave my mind. She'd thought she could smooth it all over with a few half-truths and a fake apology, but not this time. This time, I'd make sure she faced every consequence of her betrayal. I pulled into a gas station, the rain blurring the neon lights outside as it streaked down the windshield. My hands were trembling, not from the cold, but from the adrenaline still surging through me. And underneath that rush, something else was beginning to take shape, a plan. She thought she could dismiss this, that her little mistake would fade, that I'd be too soft to fight back. But she was wrong. I wasn't going to let her walk away from this unscathed. Everything she valued, everything she believed her lies could protect, I'd tear apart, just like she had done to our marriage. I reached for my phone, instinctively thinking of Mike, my best friend. He didn't know yet, but I needed someone on my side, someone I could trust. It rang twice before his groggy voice picked up. "Jake, man, it's like 4 a.m. What's going on?" I leaned back in the seat, watching the rain pound on the gas station roof. "Mike, I need you, and I need you now." His tone shifted, concern creeping in. "What happened? You okay?" "No," I answered bluntly. "Megan's been cheating. I found out tonight." There was a pause, followed by a low whistle. "Man, I'm so sorry. I knew things were rough, but, damn. What do you need?" I clenched my jaw, focusing on the next steps. I need to get my stuff out of the house before she tries to twist this. And I need a plan to make sure she doesn't screw me over in the divorce. Mike didn't miss a beat. "I'm with you, man. I'll be there in an hour. Just, don't do anything crazy before I get there, okay?" I hung up, feeling a sliver of relief knowing Mike was with me. But I had more to do. This wasn't just a messy breakup, I was going to hit her where it hurt. Scrolling through my contacts, I found the name I hadn't wanted to call until now, Ben, my lawyer. I never imagined needing him for something like this, but life has a way of knocking you sideways when you least expect it. It rang once before Ben answered, sounding groggy but professional. "Jake, what's going on?" "Ben, I need your help. Megan's been unfaithful, and I'm filing for divorce." There was a brief pause, but he didn't sound surprised. "All right. First things first, don't leave the house permanently. If you walk out, she could claim abandonment. Stay put, at least until we figure things out." I nodded to myself, the legal side of this mess snapping into focus. I'm not giving her a chance to twist this. She'll try to make me the villain, but I need to keep control. What are my options? How do I make sure I don't lose everything? Ben's tone was calm, measured. "We'll make sure of that. Start gathering evidence, texts, emails, anything that shows the affair. We'll build your case around that. The courts take infidelity seriously, Jake. You've got a solid chance of coming out of this with what's fair, but we need to be smart." I rubbed my temples, feeling the weight of everything settle on me. I hadn't thought about the courts, the paperwork, the legal battles this would bring, but I was ready to fight. "All right. I'll do whatever needs doing." I hung up and sat there, the silence filling the car as my breath fogged the windows. The rain was still coming down hard, but it didn't feel chaotic anymore. Instead, it felt like it was washing away the haze of anger and hurt, leaving a clarity I hadn't felt in years. I knew exactly what needed to happen next. I drove back to the house, my mind racing. If Megan thought she could keep manipulating me, she was dead wrong. She might have lied right to my face and gotten away with it for a while, but those days were over. Every move I made now was deliberate, planned. I was going to outsmart her, no matter what it took. When I pulled into the driveway, the house was dark. She'd gone to bed, just like any other night, as if none of this had happened. A wave of disgust hit me, seeing how easily she could shut down and move on, but it didn't matter. By morning, her world would be turned on its head. I slipped into the house quietly, careful not to make a sound. I wasn't planning to confront her anymore, there was no point. I gathered a few essentials and headed to the guest room at the far end of the house. The door clicked shut behind me, closing her off from me for one of the last times. The guest room felt foreign, like a space I didn't belong in, but that was fine. This was only temporary, I was setting the pieces in place. Before going to bed, I took out my phone and looked through her messages with Ben again, each disgusting word and incriminating detail displayed on the screen. She wasn't going to walk away from this unscathed. As I lay down, the weight of the night pressed on me, but I felt a strange sense of calm. The storm wasn't over, but now I was the one controlling it, and Megan had no idea what was coming. By tomorrow, the reckoning would begin, and this time, I'd be ready. I woke up to the muted sound of rain still tapping against the windows. The guest room felt distant, cold, unfamiliar but somehow comforting in its separation from Megan. I hadn't slept much, but adrenaline had carried me through the night. Now, as I stared at the ceiling, the weight of everything settled over me again, yet I wasn't overwhelmed. I felt sharp, focused. I could hear faint noises coming from the other side of the house. Megan was awake. It was only a matter of time before she came looking for me. I'd already made up my mind, I'd stay calm, collected. I wouldn't let her emotions dictate how this played out. I picked up my phone, scrolling through the screenshots of her messages with Ben, letting each line remind me why I couldn't cave in, why this wasn't just some spat that could be patched up with empty apologies. It was deeper than that, she'd crossed a line there was no coming back from. A knock came at the door. "Jake." Her voice was cautious, testing the waters. "Are you in there?" I stayed silent for a few moments, letting her feel the weight of the door between us. Finally, I got up and opened it. There she was, standing in the hallway, hair still damp from a quick shower, makeup hastily reapplied. She looked like she was trying to hit some kind of reset button, hoping that looking put together would somehow erase what had happened. Her eyes scanned my face, trying to read me, but I kept my expression blank. "Can we talk?" she asked, her voice soft, almost pleading. It was a tone I hadn't heard from her in a long time. Megan was usually composed, in control, often even cold. But now, there was a hint of uncertainty, a flicker of doubt. I could see it. I stayed planted in the doorway. "Talk," I said, my tone flat. She fidgeted with the hem of her shirt, looking down briefly before meeting my eyes again. "Jake, I'm sorry about last night. I didn't mean for things to get out of hand. I was upset, and I said things I shouldn't have." I raised an eyebrow, waiting for her to go on, but she left it vague, skimming over the details. She was hoping for a pass, expecting me to let her off easy by ignoring the specifics. I wasn't falling for it. "That's it?" I asked, keeping my voice steady. "That's your apology?" She blinked, caught off guard. I know I messed up. I know what I did was wrong, but tearing up the marriage certificate, Jake, you didn't have to do that." I cut her off, my patience wearing thin. "You think that's the issue? That I tore up a piece of paper? You think that's what brought us here?" She bit her lip, her calm facade cracking, frustration slipping through. "I made a mistake, okay? I admitted that. But you're acting like it's the end of the world. It was just one night." "Stop," I said, my voice sharper than I intended. I took a breath, fighting to keep control. "Just one night. This isn't about one night, Megan. It's about the lies, about sneaking around behind my back, about treating me like I'm some kind of fool." She opened her mouth to argue, but I wasn't done. "You think I didn't hear you last night? Talking to him on the phone, laughing about me, saying I'd come crawling back like I was a joke." Her eyes widened, and for the first time, I saw real fear flash across her face. She hadn't realized I'd overheard. She thought she could twist this like she always had. She started, but I raised a hand, stopping her. "No more excuses, Megan. I'm done. You've been lying to me for months, maybe even longer, pretending we were fine while you were off with him. My voice turned cold. And now you want to stand here and pretend it's no big deal, that I'm the one overreacting. She took a step closer, her voice trembling now. Jake, please. I didn't want to hurt you. I don't know what I was thinking. It just happened. But we can fix this. We can go to therapy, talk it through. I let out a bitter laugh. Therapy? You think therapy is going to erase what you did? This isn't something you can just talk your way out of, Megan. You made your choice, and now you get to live with it. I could see her crumbling, the cracks in her mask widening, her control slipping away. Please, Jake. I know I messed up, but we've been together so long. Don't throw it all away over this. I stepped in closer, lowering my voice so each word would hit. You threw it away the moment you chose him over us. For the first time, she was silent. Tears welled up in her eyes, and she looked down, unable to hold my gaze. The weight of the moment pressed down on both of us, the finality sinking in. I could have left then. I could have walked away, leaving her to stew in her guilt. But there was one last thing she needed to understand. I'm not just walking away, Megan, I said, my voice quiet but firm. I'm going to make sure you feel every consequence of this. You're not getting out of this unscathed. Her head snapped up, panic flickering across her face. Wait, your lawyer, Jake. No, please. We don't have to do this. We can work it out. Just give me a chance. I shook my head. You had your chance, Megan. You had 1,000 chances, but you chose to betray me. I'm done giving you any more. She reached out, trying to touch my arm, but I stepped back, letting her hand drop uselessly to her side. Don't make this harder than it has to be, she whispered, her voice cracking. We can work it out without lawyers, without tearing everything apart. I looked at her then, really looked at her, for the first time in what felt like ages. The person standing before me wasn't the woman I had married. Maybe she never had been. And as much as it stung, I realized I didn't care anymore. The love I'd once felt had been chipped away, bit by bit, until now there was nothing left. This is already destroyed, I said, my tone as cold as I felt. And you did that, Megan. Not me. I turned and walked away, leaving her standing in the doorway with tears finally spilling over, but I didn't stop. I couldn't. This wasn't about salvaging what was broken, it was about ending it for good. Outside, the rain had stopped, but the air was still thick, holding on to the remnants of the storm. I paused, taking it all in, feeling the weight on my shoulders lifting, piece by piece. I wasn't free yet, but I was getting there. As I drove off, my phone buzzed beside me, a message from Mike. I'm outside. Ready whenever you are. For the first time in what felt like years, I smiled to myself, feeling a faint sense of relief. The reckoning had begun. When I pulled back up to the house, Mike was already waiting, leaning against his car with his arms crossed, his face serious. No jokes or easy smiles this time, he knew how big this moment was. He gave me a nod as I got out, but didn't say anything right away. He didn't need to. He could read it all on my face. How bad is it? He asked, his voice low, as though he didn't want to disturb the fragile calm before the next storm. Worse than I expected, I replied, leaning against the hood of my car. I took a deep breath, finding the right words. She's been cheating, Mike. With some guy named Ben. I found out last night. Caught her walking out of his place. Mike exhaled sharply, shaking his head. Man, I'm so sorry. I can't imagine. So, what now? I looked at him, feeling that same cold clarity settle over me. I'm not letting her get away with this. I've already called my lawyer. I'm filing for divorce, but I'm staying in the house. She's going to make this nasty, and I'm not giving her any advantage. Mike nodded, his jaw tight. Good call. Don't give her a chance to spin this on you. I pushed off the car, feeling the adrenaline surge back. I need to get my stuff set up in the guest room for now. I can't stand being near her, but I'm not letting her claim I abandoned her. Mike straightened, his face set. I've got your back. Let's do this. We headed inside, and the moment the door closed behind us, the air grew thick. Megan wasn't in sight, but I could feel her presence, lurking somewhere in the shadows, watching, waiting. Let's move quickly, I muttered to Mike. We headed straight to the bedroom, the room I'd shared with her for years. Now, it felt like enemy territory. I grabbed a duffel bag from the closet and started packing my clothes. Mike stood by the door, his eyes scanning the room like a guard, watching for any sign of her. It felt ridiculous, how tense everything was, but this was the reality now. The woman I had loved and trusted was someone I had to outsmart, outmaneuver. As I packed, I couldn't help but glance around the room, at all the memories, the photos, souvenirs from trips we'd taken together. They were just hollow reminders now, pieces of a life that no longer existed. As I continued packing, I noticed Mike looking at a framed photo on the dresser, a shot from our honeymoon. It was Megan and me, both smiling, sunburnt and carefree on some beach, back when everything was full of promises and laughter. He pointed to it, hesitating. You want to take any of this? I shook my head, not even able to look at it. No. Let her keep it. It doesn't mean anything anymore. We packed up the last of my essentials, each item stripped of its meaning, just things I needed to bring to get away. As we zipped the bag shut, the door creaked open, and there she was, Megan, pale-faced, eyes red from crying, but still wearing that look of defiance. The way she looked at me, as if I were the one who had torn everything apart, made my blood boil. You're really going through with this, aren't you? She asked, her voice trembling but tinged with accusation. You're just going to walk away from everything we built? I zipped up the duffel bag with a hard pull, refusing to meet her gaze. I'm not walking away. I'm making sure I don't go down with you. Her eyes flashed with anger, her tone laced with bitterness. All of this over one mistake. You're going to throw away our entire marriage over one stupid night. I turned to face her, finally snapping. One night. This wasn't just one night, Megan. You've been lying to me, hiding things, and then you laughed about it with him, like it was all some joke. Don't stand there and act like I'm the one who destroyed this. Mike stepped forward, sensing the rising tension, but I held up a hand to stop him. This was mine to handle. Megan folded her arms, her lips quivering, but her gaze hardened with defiance. I already told you, Jake, it didn't mean anything. I love you, not him. Can't we fix this? I looked at her, this woman I had once trusted with my life, and felt only a cold, distant anger. Her words, her apologies, they meant nothing now. She was playing the part, hoping I'd give in, but I saw through it. No, Megan, we can't fix this. You can't fix this, I said, my voice steady and final. I'm filing for divorce. It's over. For a moment, her face seemed to crumble, and I thought she might cry. But then, as quickly as it came, her expression shifted, her defenses snapping back into place. Fine, she said flatly, her tone empty of any emotion. Do what you have to do, but don't think this will be easy for you. You want a war, Jake? You'll get one. There it was, the real Megan, the one who would claw her way to whatever she wanted, no matter the cost. I'm ready for whatever you've got, I replied, locking eyes with her. But remember, you started this. She didn't respond, just glared at me with hardened eyes before turning and walking out, her footsteps echoing down the hall, fading into silence. Mike let out a long breath, shaking his head. Man, she's ruthless. You sure you're ready for this? I slung the bag over my shoulder, feeling the weight of it all, our past, the fight ahead, settling on me. But instead of feeling crushed, I felt steady. I have to be, I said quietly. I'm not giving her an inch. She's going to feel every bit of this. Mike clapped me on the shoulder. All right, then. Let's get this done. We moved my things to the guest room, setting up a temporary space while the logistics of the divorce unfolded. The house felt like a war zone now, every room charged with tension, every sound magnified by the hostility hanging between us. But I wasn't going anywhere, not until I had secured everything I needed. After we finished, Mike headed out, giving me one last nod of support before leaving me alone to face the house, and Megan. I stood in the guest room for a while, staring at the walls, thinking about what was coming next. This was only the beginning. She had made it clear she wasn't backing down, but neither was I. As I lay on the unfamiliar bed, a strange calm settled over me. I'd spent so long blinded by her lies, but now, everything was finally clear. The war had begun, and I wasn't going to lose, no matter what Megan threw at me. The days that followed were like living in the eye of a storm. The house was tense, the air thick, as though everything could shatter at any moment. I stayed in the guest room, avoiding Megan as much as possible. We moved through the house like strangers, barely exchanging glances, each of us doing our best to steer clear of the other. Every corner seemed heavy with 1,000 unsaid words, 1,000 broken promises. The real fight was happening behind the scenes. I met with Ben again, and we mapped out a strategy. I wasn't just going to walk away, I'd make sure I didn't lose the house, my financial security, or everything I had worked for. Megan wanted a war, and I was ready to give her one. But in the back of my mind, a nagging thought reminded me this wasn't just about me. There was more collateral damage to consider, people Megan probably hadn't thought about, or maybe she had. Either way, it wouldn't just be us suffering the fallout. I hadn't told my parents yet. They had loved Megan from the start, seen her as the perfect daughter-in-law, charming, poised, always thoughtful. What would they say when they found out? Would they even believe it? I dialed my mom's number, my chest tightening with dread. The phone rang a few times before her warm voice came through. "Jake, it's so good to hear from you, honey. How are you?" I hesitated, feeling the words catch in my throat. How was I supposed to explain this? How could I tell her everything without breaking down? "Mom, there's something I need to tell you," I started, my voice wavering despite my best efforts. "It's about Megan." There was a pause, and I could almost feel her concern through the phone. "Is everything all right, Jake? You don't sound like yourself." I took a deep breath, forcing the words out. "No, Mom. It's not. She's been cheating on me. I found out a few days ago. And I think it's been going on for a while." The silence stretched so long I thought maybe the call had dropped. Then I heard her take a shaky breath. "Oh, Jake, I don't know what to say. Are you sure? I mean, are you really sure?" "I'm sure," I replied flatly. "I've seen the messages. I've seen it all." Another pause, and then her voice softened, tinged with a sadness I'd never heard from her before. "I just can't believe it. She always seemed so devoted to you. Are you okay? What are you going to do?" "I've already filed for divorce," I said, the words carrying both a sting and a strange sense of finality. There was no going back now. Megan wasn't who I thought she was, and I wasn't going to let her get away with it. She was quiet for a moment before letting out a long, heavy sigh, thick with disappointment and sorrow. "I'm so sorry, honey. I know how much you loved her. I'm just so sorry." "Me too, Mom," I replied, feeling the weight of it all. After I hung up, a strange mixture of relief and exhaustion washed over me. Telling my mom was the first step in dismantling the illusion Megan had crafted, not just around me but around everyone who knew her. Now the truth would start breaking through. Later that day, as I sat in the guest room, I stared at my phone. There was another conversation I couldn't put off, talking to Megan's family, especially her brother, Kyle. Over the years, Kyle had become more than just Megan's brother, he'd become a close friend. Despite everything, I knew he had a right to know. I hesitated for a long time, my thumb hovering over the screen before I finally typed a message. Hey, Kyle, I need to talk to you. It's important. Can we meet up? His reply came quickly. Kyle, of course, man. What's going on? Is everything okay with you and Megan? Reading his message, bitterness rose up in me. He had no idea who his sister really was. It's complicated. I'll explain when we meet. We agreed to meet at a bar that evening, a neutral spot where I could lay everything out. As I drove there, my mind spun with everything that had happened. Part of me dreaded the conversation. Kyle wasn't just Megan's brother, he was someone I trusted. But I couldn't keep this from him. He deserved to know the truth, no matter how much it hurt. When I walked into the bar, Kyle was already seated, a beer in hand. He waved me over, his usual friendly smile on his face. But as soon as I sat down, his expression shifted, he could tell something was wrong. The grin faded, replaced by a look of concern. Jake, what's going on? You look like you've been through hell. I swallowed, searching for the right words. Kyle, there's no easy way to say this, so I'm just going to say it. I took a deep breath. Megan's been cheating on me, for a while now. His eyes widened, shock and disbelief etched across his face. No, that can't be right. Megan wouldn't do that. You must be mistaken. I'm not, I replied, my voice steady, though I felt anything but. I caught her. I've seen the messages, the pictures. It's real, Kyle. He shook his head slowly, as if trying to shake away the reality of what I'd just said. I don't even know what to say, man. I never saw this coming. She's my sister. She always seemed so devoted to you. Are you sure there's no way to fix this? I met his gaze directly. There's no fixing this. I've already filed for divorce. It's over. Kyle leaned back, running a hand through his hair, looking as shaken as I felt. Damn. I'm sorry, man. I know this has to be tearing you up. It is, I admitted, my voice barely steady. But there's no going back. I just wanted you to hear it from me, not through her or anyone else. He nodded, his face hardening with a mixture of sadness and anger. Thanks for telling me. I'll talk to her, but honestly, I don't even know what I'd say to her right now. We sat in silence for a long while, sipping our drinks, the weight of the conversation pressing down on us. It wasn't just my marriage that had fallen apart, Megan's actions had set off a chain reaction, pulling everyone around us into the mess she had created. As I left the bar, the full weight of it all settled over me. This wasn't just about me and Megan anymore. It was about everyone we'd brought into our lives over the years. They were all going to feel the fallout. But that wasn't on me. Megan had made her choices, and now everyone would be living with the consequences. When I got back to the house, it was dark and quiet. Megan was in the bedroom with the door closed, and for once, I embraced the silence. I sank onto the couch, staring out the window at the rain-slick streets, thinking about everything I'd lost and everything I still had to fight for. This war wasn't over, not even close. But I was ready for whatever came next. The days passed in a blur, every moment thick with tension and silence, weighted by what had been destroyed. Megan and I barely spoke. When we did, it was short and sharp, just enough to handle what had to be handled. The house felt like a battleground, with each of us in separate corners, waiting for the other to make a move. I was counting down the days until I could finally leave for good, but I wasn't about to hand her any advantage by walking out before the legal dust settled. More than once, she tried to pull me back, using that same calculated charm she'd perfected over the years. I could see it in her eyes, the careful planning behind each word, the practiced remorse woven into her apologies. She'd catch me in the hallway, blocking my path with tear-streaked cheeks and a voice that trembled just enough to stir pity. "Jake, please," she'd whisper, her voice cracking at all the right moments. "I made a mistake. We can still fix this. You don't have to do this. We've been through so much together." But I wasn't falling for it anymore. Every time she tried to reel me in, I saw the messages with Ben, heard her laughter as she mocked me behind my back. The woman standing in front of me, pleading for forgiveness, wasn't the woman I had married. Maybe she never had been. "Don't bother, Megan," I'd say, brushing past her. "We're done." I knew exactly what she was doing, laying the groundwork, spinning her story to look like the victim. She wanted to paint herself as the remorseful wife who had made a single, forgivable mistake, while I'd be cast as the cold, unyielding husband who tore everything apart. But I wasn't going to let her get away with it. I had the evidence. I had the truth. Finally, the day came when the divorce papers arrived. I had been expecting them, but as the courier handed me the envelope, there was still a moment of hesitation. This was it, the final blow, the absolute end of everything we'd built together. But I didn't feel sadness or regret. All that was left was emptiness. I opened the envelope at the kitchen table, the weight of the papers feeling heavier than they should. The formal language, the sterile tone of the documents, it all drove the reality deeper. Our life together had been reduced to a few sheets of paper, signatures, and legal jargon. I sat there for a long time, just staring at the documents. Megan was in the living room, pretending to read a magazine, though I could feel her watching me from the corner of her eye. She hadn't said a word since the papers arrived, and she didn't need to. The silence between us was louder than any argument. I could hear her shifting in her seat, waiting for a reaction, hoping I'd say something. But I wasn't giving her that satisfaction. This was my moment, not hers. I picked up a pen and turned to the signature page. With one stroke, I signed my name, feeling the ink press into the paper like the final nail in the coffin. There wasn't a sudden sense of relief, but I felt the weight of finality, as though I had just closed a long, agonizing chapter of my life. Standing up, I walked into the living room with the signed papers in hand. Megan looked up, her eyes scanning my face for any hint of weakness, any opening she could exploit. Without a word, I handed her the papers. Her hands trembled slightly as she took them. "You really want this?" she asked, her voice wavering with disbelief and a flicker of panic. "You really want to end it like this?" I looked at her, feeling only the cold truth of what we'd become. "It's already over, Megan. This is just the paperwork." Her face twisted with anger, her eyes glistening with tears. "You're making a mistake, Jake. You'll regret this. You're throwing everything away." I met her gaze, unshaken. "No, Megan. You're the one who threw everything away. You made your choice. Now you have to live with it." Her face flushed with anger, her eyes narrowing. "You think you're so righteous, so above it all. Fine. But don't think this is going to be easy for you. I'll fight you every step of the way. You want a war? Let's have one." I could feel the venom in her words, the bitterness finally surfacing, spilling over. This wasn't about saving our marriage anymore. It was about power and control, and she wasn't going to let me go without a fight. But I was ready. "I'm not scared of you, Megan," I replied, my voice calm, unwavering. "I've prepared for this. I'm not backing down. You can try to make it as messy as you want, but it won't change the fact that it's over." Her lips twisted into a sneer, her voice filled with contempt. "We'll see about that," she spat, clutching the papers like a weapon before storming out of the room without another word. I watched her go, feeling the tension drain from the house with every step she took. This time, it was truly over. The rest of the day drifted by in a strange, muted haze. The house felt unnaturally quiet, as if even the walls had grown weary of the tension. I didn't see Megan again. She stayed holed up in the bedroom, likely plotting her next move. But it didn't matter. My part in this was finished. I'd played my role, signed the papers, and now it was time to leave her games behind. That night, I lay in the guest room, staring up at the ceiling as the distant hum of the city filled the silence. For the first time in weeks, a calm began to settle over me. It wasn't quite happiness or relief, not yet, but it was a start. It was the start of something new. The beginning of freedom. I didn't know what the future held, and I was certain the divorce would get ugly. Megan would see to that, dragging it out and clawing for as much as she could. But none of that mattered anymore. I was done being afraid of what she might try. I was finished playing by her rules. The storm had passed, and I was still here, still standing. As I closed my eyes, I felt the weight lift from my shoulders. This was the end of her control over me and the start of something better. The last battle was over, and now it was time to rebuild, on my own terms.